Welcome to Zoom. Please press pound, then enter your meeting ID, followed by the pound sign again.
Testing audio for captions. Testing audio for captions. 1, 2. Are you here on the Zoom? Did you hear it on the Zoom? Oh, okay.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Joaquin Esquivel. I'm Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Tuesday, November 19th. It is 9:06 a.m., and I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'll begin by introducing my fellow board colleagues. With me here today is Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Sean McGuire, Board Member Laurel Firestone, and Board Member Nicole Morgan. We're also joined by our Executive Director, Eric Oppenheimer, our two Chief Deputies, Karen Mogus and Jonathan Bishop, our Chief Counsel, Michael Loffer. Our Clerk of the Board is Courtney Tyler, and assisting her today is Margie Argel and Susan Reyes. As you can see, this is a hybrid meeting, so we have both in-person and virtual components. If you're watching us virtually, you should be watching us through our customary webcast on YouTube Live or the Cal EPA website. But if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, you need to be on the Zoom platform. There is a link at the top of the agenda, instructions on how to do so. But if you're having any challenges getting onto the platform, please do just email the clerk of the board at board.clerk@waterboards.ca.gov, and she can help get you onto the platform. Once you are on the platform, your camera will be off, you'll be on mute until it is your turn to speak on the item you've indicated. For everyone in the room, good morning, good to see everyone. We're here in Sacramento in the California Environmental Protection Agency building. A few announcements for us here as well. Please do observe the exits. If we happen to have an emergency, we'll calmly file out to Cesar Chavez Plaza and await any further direction. Also, if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, you need to sign up to do so. There is a QR code on the side of the room here and/or a laptop in order to sign up. Once you come up to the microphone, please do introduce yourself, any affiliation you have, and lastly, please do silence any phones so we just have an uninterrupted discussion this morning. We'll start off here, as we customarily do, with public forum, and I believe our first public forum commenter is Jeff Ellsworth.
Oh, hello, is my audio coming through?
It is. Good morning.
Thank you. I have a 4 to 5 minute presentation I'll work through quickly. Good morning, Board and Chair Esquivel. My name is Jeff Ellsworth, former mayor of St. Helena, Napa County, California, from 2018 to 2022. I want to bring your attention to and put on the record ongoing concerns at Upper Valley Disposal Service and Clover Flat Landfill in Napa County. While these matters are currently under investigation by the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Board, as well as from the FBI and U.S. Justice Department, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Cal EPA, and other public agencies, these investigations have gone on for years as impacts and risks continue. Because investigations are ongoing shouldn't mean basic protections can't be implemented or current risks and impacts addressed before things get worse with continuing fires, contamination, and impacts to the Upper Valley Disposal Service workforce, Napa Valley community, and waters leading to San Francisco Bay from these problematic Napa Valley waste operations. I continue to present these concerns to the Regional Water Board, Region 2, asking for public hearings on these matters, including with inspection protocol. These are two Napa Valley waste sites with dozens of documented fires. Last year, there was a water board settlement fine of over $600,000. There have been many violations from the California and Bay Area air quality boards. With these companies, there has been a legacy of Latino employee injuries and a Latino employee death. There has been worker exposure to unregulated radioactive waste and bio-waste with no training or protective equipment. There have been letters for closure of UVDS Clover Flat landfill facilities from numerous environmental organizations, including the Sierra Club, and environmental justice advocates like the Susquehanna Intertribal Council. There has been local, state, national, and international level media coverage on these Upper Valley Disposal Service Clover Flat landfill concerns from the Napa Valley Register, San Francisco Chronicle, Los Angeles Times, The Guardian, and others. In the last month, there have been at least 4 fire or combustion incidents at the UVDS Whitehall Lane Compost Waste and Recycling Facility in a time of high fire danger, red flag warnings in Napa County. Any one of these fire or combustion incidents could trigger the next firestorm in Napa County with volatile fuel loads at this waste site in proximity to a CAL FIRE high fire zone. Local and state fire agencies are not addressing these waste fires. This is in the Water Board purview, with contaminated fire suppression runoff waters from these toxic fires impacting the Napa River, which is the second largest freshwater inlet to the San Francisco Bay, as well as under basic public health, safety, and civil rights policies of the California EPA. under which the Water Board operates, and also including environmental justice policies of the Water Board. So in this, I also want to make you aware of a federal lawsuit filed late October of this year by 15 Latino current and former UVDS Clover Flat landfill workers. A key element of the lawsuit alleges Upper Valley Disposal Service engaged in illegal peonage, a form of indentured servitude, using workers as a captive subservient labor force without any rights, a particularly heinous circumstance from a company operating on exclusive government contracts for the County of Napa and the three small Upper Napa Valley towns of Yountville, St. Helena, and Calistoga. The details of this lawsuit are horrendous in how workers have been treated. I'm submitting the lawsuit to you with recent press coverage and a summary of main points. I hope you will take time to at least read the summary. A minimum of $100 million in damages plus special circumstances are sought that could reach as high as $500 million. In closing, there seems a collective denial that this type of deplorable mistreatment of human beings could happen in Napa County, both with the Napa County community and with public agencies tasked with oversight. But it is the tragic, well-documented reality, and now more than ever needs to be addressed in public hearings, which I hope this board will consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellsworth. I appreciate you elevating the issue here to the board and bringing it to our attention. I'll follow up with Karen Mogus here, our chief deputy, and folks here on our team. And again, just appreciate you elevating it here in public forum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mary Wood, be followed by Derek Urosek, and then Ray Tahir.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel and esteemed Water Board members. My name is Mary Wood. It is said there is no seasoned sailor who came from calm seas. This saying means to me that a truly experienced sailor or even a fledgling activist like me could not have gained their skills solely from the calm seas. They must have navigated through storms and rough conditions to develop their proficiency. It signifies that facing difficulties and overcoming these obstacles truly builds competence and resilience. My conscience will not allow me to take the easy route. It would be cheaper just to let these people get whatever they want. I am not only speaking for myself, I am speaking for relatively 6 million others who are potentially going through the same problems that I have. I have spoken openly to county LPA and state water boards, but more importantly, to my fellow members of the small public water system in El Dorado County, of which I belong. When I started this journey, I firmly believed as a water utility could work together to resolve these conflicts in a spirit of reconciliation, always keeping in mind the interests of all parties. However, the more I challenged the Water Association, the more I saw the residential customers were unwilling to negotiate any terms of the 2010 contract. Their basic philosophy is you sign the contract, you live with it. A particularly egregious and financially devastating clause is the rate structure, which requires my property to shoulder 50% of water dues and special assessments annually, while the remaining 7 customers split the other 50% equally. As an example, if the yearly dues and special assessments total $7,000, I am charged $3,500 and they're charged $500. And this is my quest for safe, accessible, and affordable water for every California, whether you're reviewed by the UC or you're just a small company. Since 2017-18 fiscal year, my water association has charged me $31,000 and $737. Shockingly, during the same period, the other 7 residential customers have been charged $3,676. except for an individual who pays no dues for his volunteer work. And plus, if you consider that they charge me $1,700 for dues and they collect only $1,500 in dues from the other people, it is no longer a 50-50 structure, but a 53.8 that I pay to their 46.2. I brought up all these issues and that it's an unbalanced pricing structure. No one will give me a clear or justifiable reason for this price disparity other than I am a commercial property. As we know, if we were in the public utility ring, maybe Prop 218, you know, but as it is, nothing is ever said why we have this. I believe that it is a discriminatory rate structure, but again, no one seems to care. No one seems to help, because if they did, then changes would be made to ensure that, in fact, all Californians were protected from predatory and unfair rate structures. In closing, it is my belief that I would not be in this legal predicament, and it is in the courts right now. I am today if there was oversight, transparency, and enforcement by local and state water agencies. We need to highlight that not only the safety of water is critical, but also focus on the other components of California Water Code Division 1, Section 106.3, which are water affordability and accessibility. Instead of leaving the local and state water agencies shirking their responsibility to the judicial system, let us make some changes. Let us not have to spend over $100,000 in legal fees to still have it in court. And is it unconscionable or not? Finally, no utility company should have the power to interfere with the California's right to safe, affordable, and accessible water. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. Appreciate your time this morning and know your frustration here. And again, we'll help to continue to do our part to try to bridge you to the PUC, and appreciate your time this morning, though. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Derek Urosik, be followed by Ray Tahir.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. My name is Derek Urosik, and I'm speaking today as the chair of the Kern County Subbasins Coordination Committee, representing all the GSAs of the Kern County Subbasin. We are grateful for the hard work and dedication of the State Board staff and their efforts to work collaboratively with our technical team to provide feedback that allows us to improve our GSP. The Kern County Subbasins GSA submitted a draft 2024 Groundwater Sustainability Plan to State Board staff in May of 2024. And since then, we have been in regular communication to address board staff concerns. We believe that the positive collaboration with the board staff has been instrumental in the timely development of our improved GSPs. We are encouraged by the board's decision to cancel the Cahuilla Subbasin probationary hearing to allow staff the opportunity to complete a thorough review of the newly amended GSPs. The Kern County Subbasin is eager to submit our formally adopted GSPs in December to the board, and we look forward to a continued productive partnership with staff during their review. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for yours as well. Appreciate it, Mr. Urosik. Next, I'd like to call up Ray Tahir.
Good morning, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, I have a presentation that I sent. Very good. Next slide, please. But before I get started, though, board members, and good morning to you, I'm here today to rebut Chief Counsel Offer's assertion that the legislature prohibits ex parte communication. It does not. Actually, it does the opposite. I should point out that I'm no GAP. I've been involved in stormwater permitting and TM deals since 1993. There isn't a lot that I don't know about this subject, modesty aside. So let's go. Mr. Laufer is mistaken and failed to cite the legislation on which his claim is based. You should be aware that the current legislation addresses ex parte communication, the Senate Bill 965, adopted in 2012, and is implemented through Port of Cologne, Section 13267. The intent of 965 was to facilitate communication with board members pending an adjudicated proceeding. According to SB 965, the legislative analysis thereof, referring to pre-Senate Bill 965. The current rules in place at the state boards severely restrict participation by affected stakeholders in the state board permitting process and prohibit communication with members of the state board once a draft permit or other notice of proposed action has been prepared and released by staff of the water board. Instead, local governments, businesses, other stakeholders are often limited to just a few minutes of testimony before the board during a formal hearing, despite profound impact on board decisions that have on these regulated entities. Next slide, please. Port of Cologne 13287 reflects SB 965's relaxation on prohibited ex parte communication. It mentions prohibiting ex parte communication only to the following extent. A board may prohibit ex parte communications for a period beginning not more than 14 days before the day of a board meeting at which the decision in the proceeding is scheduled for board action. It goes on to say that ex parte communications regarding a board action may be permitted as follows. All ex parte communications shall be reported by the interested person, regardless of whether the communication was initiated by the interested person. A notice of ex parte communication shall be filed with the board within 7 days of communication. This hasn't happened, by the way. The notices may address multiple ex parte communications in the same proceeding, provided that notice of each communication identified therein is timely. Next slide, please. Owing to the misinterpretation of ex parte communication requirements is Mr. Laufer's 2013 question and answer memorandum. One glaring example is the following. An adjudicated proceeding is pending for an administrative liability order from the time an administrative civil liability complaint is issued. A proceeding for issuance of waste discharge requirements is pending before a regional board when the board receives a report of discharge, because it is an application for a decision that will occur in a hearing before the board. This is incorrect. Nothing in SB 965 or in Port of Cologne mentions the ROWD as the beginning of the pending phase. As mentioned above, 965, the pending phase begins when the board proposes the permit to the public either during a workshop or public hearing. Further, the public can comment on it either before or during any of these meetings. If comments are submitted outside of them, they need only be distributed to the other board members that did not receive this communication. Next slide, please. This is a serious overreach and is responsible for preventing the public and interested parties from commenting on certain NPDES permits, namely individual and MS4 permits. In some cases, RB4 has taken months and sometimes years after the ROWD was issued to even bring the subject permits to workshops or public hearings. During this time, I and others were illegally prevented from submitting written comments to the board members because of this ex parte communication fallacy. This is just one of the several reasons why RB4 MS4 permits should be voided. Even to this day, more recently, RB Counsel Nunez advised me not to comment on the pending RB4 enforcement action that was leveled against several MS4 permittees. Next slide, please. Mr. Laufer refers to 965 in his Q&A memo, but incorrectly says the changes resulting from Senate Bill 965 generally allow ex parte communications about issues concerning certain pending general orders of the water boards, but make certain that interested persons subject to reporting requirements. Nothing in SB 965 mentions any mention of pending general orders, which allow ex parte communication. First of all general orders include general industrial activity and construction permits. They do not include individual or MS4 permits. and require a different set of requirements that are not addressed in SB 965. General orders fall under the enrollment category that includes a class of discharges. They don't even require reasonable board action and are not even subject to ex parte communication. Next slide, please. Mr. Laufer claims that I was referring to an opportunity to cure an inadvertent communication, which he believes does not change the fact that communication is prohibited. I was not referring to, nor have I ever made reference to a cure for inadvertent ex parte communication. I had, however, mentioned to our before council of the situation involving Secretary Jared Blumfeld and several Santa Ana board members concerning the Poseidon desal project, which requires an individual permit and therefore is subject to adjudication.
Mr. Tahir, I don't mean to interrupt you. I believe you had asked for 7 minutes, and I've been timing here, and you're at 7 minutes. So if you don't mind.
I'm almost done. Let me just figure this slide, and I'm out of here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Tahir.
Okay. So, back to the desal project, which requires an individual NPDES permit and is subject to adjudication. The Secretary reached out to several Santa Ana board members concerning the desal project in support of it. I pointed out that because each board member had been contacted by the Secretary and disclosed the communication, it did not constitute prohibited ex parte communication. Perhaps this is the cure Mr. Laufer is talking about. My final point here is, because of this, I and other members of the public, interested or not, should be able to communicate with board members without breaching ex parte communication as long as the other members are informed. As I mentioned, I was denied this right. And that's my close. Oh, by the way, I sent each to chair and board chair this morning a recommendation for revising and updating Mr. Laufer's Q&A memorandum. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tahir. I do appreciate your time and in raising here your concerns. I feel we've been trying to be as very responsive as we can to what you've put forward. When it comes to the memo you sent, the vice chair and I did send that along to Mr. Laufer. We will respond back in writing there, so as we can, to be clear. And I think there were some of the things that you mentioned this morning that were kind of conflated within our authorities. And I'll see if Mr. Laufer wants to respond to those, or again, since we have your memo, we can respond specifically to everything laid out there as well.
Yeah, if that's done in writing, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure, and I'll be happy to respond to Mr. Tahir in writing. I think for all the board members who live and breathe this, you're aware that what Mr. Tahir is doing is conflating a very special provision of Porter Cologne that was added as a result of legislation back in the early 2010s that allowed ex parte communications, notwithstanding the general prohibitions that apply to all other water board proceedings under the Administrative Procedures Act. And the Administrative Procedures Act is very clear that in those adjudicative matters that are subject to it, the ex parte prohibition commences from the filing of an application for agency decision. In our parlance, that is a report of waste discharge. The special rules provide, contrary to what Mr. Tahir has said, a very narrow exception that applies to what we characterize as general orders. It's actually defined in subdivision A2 of 13287, and you have to have very specific categories in order to allow that process of disclosure, which the board uses regularly on its general orders, such as the dairy order, which has been subject to a number of disclosures. It doesn't change the rule with respect to individuals. This is the danger of trying to pick out individual code sections without understanding how all the pieces work together. And in terms of the memo that was circulated today, happy to share it with the other board members. But it doesn't reflect what the law states, but instead is more of a wish casting for what Mr. Tahir would prefer the law to provide. So I'll be happy to provide an answer in writing, and I'll share that with the board members.
Thank you, Mr. Laufer. Appreciate that response. And nonetheless, still, Mr. Tahir, appreciate your outreach and opportunity for us to better explain this. Clerk, do we have any more public commenters? Okay. Okay, yes, thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Kimberly Burr. Or actually, I believe Ms. Burr may be looking to speak on, public forum. Okay, Ms. Burr, good to see you.
See you, Chairman. Yeah, I did switch over to public comment for, I didn't realize that other item was uncontested, but I just wanted to thank you guys and thank your amazing technical staff for making this possible. I also want to just talk about the dam situation and storage. It's, to me, we've worked so hard in California to understand, the harm that dams can cause. And so I'm not begrudging paying staff and having more staff. My concern is, accelerating permitting for water storage. And that to me seems a little backwards when we have anadromous fish that are blinking out, and we need to protect their streams and habitats and tributaries, and dams just seem counter to that. It seems to me the population of California is stable at best and maybe shrinking, and we are continuing to look at water storage as a solution rather than conservation. So I don't know if you guys have already done this, but I would like to see a study of all the water users and their allocations, and generally speaking, who's using the most water and can we conserve more rather than build dams. So yay for more staff. Slowing down permitting on water rights permits seems to me the smart thing to do. I wouldn't be in favor of accelerating permitting. You're going to create more entitlements, which I think becomes problematic in the future. So I'm here to just speak for the anadromous fishery from here on the Russian River and Green Valley Creek, and thank you guys for all your very important work.
Thank you as well for the comments, Ms. Burr. Appreciate the engagement here and your comments this morning in public forum. Thank you. All right, I believe that brings us to the end of public forum. And again, thank everyone that addressed the board this morning. That now brings us into our regular board business. And the first item of board business is consideration of adoption of the November 6th board meeting minutes. Look to my fellow board colleagues for motion.
I'll move adoption of the minutes.
Thank you.
I'll second.
You both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Vice Chair Diadamo?
Aye.
Board Member Morgan?
Aye.
Board Member McGuire?
Abstain.
Board Member Firestone?
Abstain.
And Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Board meeting minutes are adopted. And that now brings us to a tranche of uncontested items. I know Ms. Burr, I think, had initially indicated she would comment on item number 2, so I believe that's still uncontested. But item number 3, I see has a speak if necessary, I think from Ms. Mackey. Okay. We can pull it if we'd like to have a conversation looking to fellow board colleagues, but if she's okay with it remaining on the uncontested list and not discussed, that's fine too. Or Mr. Loffer, if you have.
Yeah, no, that's my understanding, is it was only if it came off and she was just registering support. And Ms. Mackey, you're welcome to go ahead and come off camera if you'd prefer that the item come off consent, but otherwise my understanding is the board can move those 2 items on the consent calendar.
Appreciate that. And not seeing anything immediately from Ms. Mackey, do thank her for her support and her interest in the item. But I think we can take the 2 items as uncontested.
Okay, I'll make a motion to move items 2 and 3.
A second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Board Member Morgan?
Aye.
Board Member McGuire?
Aye.
Board Member Firestone?
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo?
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. And appreciate all the great work that I know went into those 2 items, and looking forward to being able to make sure we're investing, especially on item number 3, in our drinking water and wastewater systems, and appreciate the budget support from the legislature and the governor. Okay, that now brings us to a tranche of informational items, and the first being item number 4, which is our current hydrologic conditions and response. Good to see you, Mr. Ekdahl. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel, members of the board. I'm stepping in for Jessica, who normally gives the hydro updates. She's up in Clear Lake this morning preparing for a Hitch Summit, which will be today, tomorrow, and Thursday. Let's go to our next slide. This will be a very quick hydro update. Next slide. You can see our typical standard curves based on where we are for this time of year. It's a little bit difficult to see, but down in the lower left corner, you can see current, I think it's about 3.0. This is for the Northern Sierra 8-station index. I think people are likely aware, but we're forecast to receive a pretty significant atmospheric river starting tonight. The forecast for Reading, I was just looking at it on my phone, 8 to 10 inches of rain in Reading. It increases going northward. One of the nuances in these curves is, especially at the earliest times of the year, October, November, even just one little inch of rain can really shift where we are. This could significantly shift where we are by the December update. So more to come here. We're still early in the precipitation season and can't really say where things will end up, but it's good to see at least one significant event coming. If we go to the next slide, thing to note is that the atmospheric river is really forecast to hit just Northern California in bulk. There are forecasts that suggest that some of the rain will start to make its way south, but not nearly in the amounts that are forecast for Northern California. So we'll take a look at our next hydro update to see how this starts to break out and how these different curves are going to reflect the storm that we just are currently getting or hope to get. Next slide. And then for the Tulare Basin, you can see we're still pretty low in the year, but more to come. Let's go to the next slide. You can see our current reservoir conditions. Reservoirs are overall about average for this time of year, maybe slightly above average for certain locations. That's a great place to start as we go into our wettest part of the year. Next slide. A quick update on the Scott and Shasta rivers. For the Shasta, all curtailments were lifted as of October 31st. As of yesterday at 9 a.m., flows were about 165 CFS. The November flow requirement is 125. So we're above that. And again, with the bulk of this atmospheric river forecast to hit kind of Northern California, Southern Oregon, we anticipate that these flows will stay relatively elevated for the near future. And fish counts, we have about 4,800 Chinook and about 9 coho counted in the watershed as of November 13th. So fish are starting to move up. One other thing to note is that I think there's been a fair number of news articles about fish moving up through the entire Klamath as a whole. And so now there are reports of, dozens, if not hundreds of salmon spawning above the northernmost dam. So that's a pretty significant achievement worth noting. In the Scott River, all curtailments lifted as of November 13th. Flows yesterday were about 112 CFS. The flow target is 60 CFS for November and 150 for December. Looking again at the weather forecast, the Marble and Scott Mountains, which are tributary to the Scott River, are forecast to receive in excess of 96 inches of snow over the next 5 days. So that's a great contribution to this overall water pack, and we're hopeful that that feeds the system for a while yet to go. So again, more to come here. 557 Chinook and 142 coho counted as of November 13th. Stay informed. We do have some things coming up. We did have a workshop on November, I think it was the 13th, 12th or 13th. It was last week. It would have been 12th, Tuesday the 12th, to highlight potential updates to the existing emergency regulations. We are soliciting public comment and public feedback for the next couple of weeks on that item and encourage folks to submit recommendations on how those could be modified or changed if they're further pursued later in the year. Next slide. You can see the flow in the Scott. This is our standard curve, and you can see again things are trending upwards and are above the in-stream flow targets established by the emergency regulation. Next slide. And similar graph for the Shasta. Next slide. So here's the overview of the workshop that we had last week. The comment period does close at 12 noon on the 20th, so that is tomorrow. And we are anticipating bringing an item before the board at its January 7th board meeting, and more to come on that. So with that, I believe that is the last of our slides. Let's go next slide. Oh, our reminder, annual diversion and use reportings. So reports are due February 1st. The water year closed September 30th. You can report now, but the deadline is February 1st. And a reminder that for folks that are listening, there are now late fees for certain post 14 appropriative diverters that, if you're more than 30 days late, you could be charged a late submittal fee for your annual use. So make sure you get them in on time and you won't get a late fee. So I think with that, let's go to the next slide. That wraps things up. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks. I know we're all very much anticipating this first significant atmospheric river of the season. I feel Californians at this point can't help but be weather watchers. Was actually somewhere recently, I was at a conference just yesterday where there was someone from New Jersey, and the drought conditions they're experiencing there similarly has turned them all into weather watchers, trying to see when that next storm is going to come through. So just appreciate all that. I think would just ask at some point, and I don't know when this most makes sense, but sometime in the new year, that we have an informational item on the new water rights data system, kind of update folks where we are, timelines, and kind of what to expect there. Just, as I think of the diversion reports, and here I appreciate always the focus and continued need to make sure we're getting the right data in so we can be good decision makers. As we transition to that platform, really see it as just an incredible opportunity to have a better place where people can be better reporting on time. And I think worth maybe just kind of bringing up to speed folks that haven't been necessarily tracking where we are on that project.
That would be great. We'd be happy to do so. And it would be good timing in the new year, maybe February-ish timeframe as we start to look at the build that we just completed. And now we're kind of putting the polishing touches on it, making sure that the language is the right language and that it flows the right way. So it'd be a good time to come back to the board and kind of demonstrate or show what it looks like.
Fantastic. Thank you. We don't have any commenters on the item, so looking to fellow board colleagues if they have any questions, comments, anything further they'd like to see from the update in the future. All right, hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Ekdahl. Really appreciate it. That wraps up item number 4 and now brings them to item number 5, which is a status report on our toxicity provisions implementation. Give a moment for folks to swap out here. Good morning. Good to see you all.
I can go ahead and jump on it.
All right. All right. Good morning, members of the board. This is agenda item number 5, the Toxicity Provisions Implementation Status Report. I am Jacob Iverson, an environmental scientist for the Division of Water Quality's Inland Standards Planning and Implementation Unit. With me today are Zane Polson, Senior Environmental Scientist, Rebecca Fitzgerald, the Water Quality Standards and Assessment Section Program Manager, and Elizabeth Barrett, Staff Counsel. Next slide, please. The purpose of this item is to provide the State Water Board with a report on the status of the implementation of the toxicity provisions. The board directed staff to provide this report when the provisions were adopted in 2020. Next slide, please. Today's presentation will include information on the history and content of the toxicity provisions, the status of implementation of the provisions in non-stormwater NPDES permits, changes in monitoring frequencies in these permits, test results from required toxicity monitoring, laboratory and discharger experiences with toxicity testing since adoption, addressing challenges with toxicity testing and sampling, and toxicity monitoring efforts for other regulatory programs throughout the state. Next slide, please. So here is a summary of the recent history and content of the provisions. The State Water Board adopted the provisions on December 1st, 2020, and then adopted revisions on October 5th, 2021. The provisions went into effect for Clean Water Act purposes when US EPA approved them on May 1st, 2023. The provisions included numeric water quality objectives for acute and chronic toxicity, a statistical approach to analyze test results, the test of significant toxicity or TST, a program of implementation, and the provisions provide consistent protection of aquatic life beneficial uses in inland surface waters, enclosed bays, estuaries, and coastal lagoons. And they also provide protection of aquatic life from the effects of known and unknown toxicants. Next slide, please. So now we will report on the status of the requirements of the provisions in NPDES permits. Next slide, please. So as of August 2024, 55 NPDES NPDES permits included the requirements specified in the provisions. In our analysis, we have focused primarily on NPDES permits for publicly owned treatment works, POTWs, and this is because the large majority of permits in the state are for POTWs. Next slide, please. Let's see. So here's a breakdown of those permits. Each region has adopted at least one. 38 of these, the vast majority, are for POTWs, and this represents about 1/4 of those that discharge to inland surface waters. Discharges to ocean waters are not included. There are 6 general NPDES permits, and these apply to classes or types of facilities or discharge activities. One of these covers 20 distinct POTW enrollees, but not distinct POTW facilities. Other individually permitted facilities include examples such as refineries, fish hatcheries, several others. Next slide, please. Next, we will talk about changes in toxicity monitoring frequencies for the largest group of these permits, again, POTWs. Next slide. So here are changes in chronic monitoring frequency in POTW permits. As expected, many facilities increased their chronic toxicity monitoring frequency to comply with the provision's standardized monitoring frequency requirements. Before the provisions, the most frequent monitoring frequency was annually, and this was for 13 permits, or 13 of these permits. Approximately 56% of individual POTW permittees increased to quarterly or monthly monitoring. 5% decreased from quarterly to semi-annually, twice a year. However, about 39% did not change their chronic monitoring frequency. An estimate in the staff report was that as many as 80% of dischargers would need to increase their chronic monitoring frequency upon reissuance or renewal of their permits. This lower than expected increase may be because permitting authorities are able to grant reduced monitoring frequencies to dischargers that qualify. Next slide, please. So in contrast, here are acute monitoring frequency requirements for the same set of permits. These either decreased, stayed the same, or were entirely removed. Approximately 60% of permittees no longer monitor for acute toxicity, about 10% reduced their monitoring frequency, and about 30% did not change their monitoring frequency. 9 of the 11 permits that did not change frequency had no acute monitoring requirements either prior to or after the adoption of the provisions. Staff expect that the removal of acute testing and monitoring requirements has offset increases in chronic monitoring costs, but the acute tests are generally less expensive than chronic tests, so costs are likely only partially offset for many dischargers. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk about results of toxicity tests that use the TST for some, again, a subset of the facilities that we've already looked at. Next slide, please. So monitoring data from the NPDES permits. In order to analyze passes and fails of the TST statistical approach of these toxicity tests, as well as potential violations resulting from fails. Since the provisions came into effect, staff downloaded toxicity monitoring data from the California Integrated Water Quality System, SWRCB. It contains electronic self-monitoring report data submitted by dischargers. As of September 2024, only 19 of 38 POTW facilities that we've already looked at had submitted any TST data. Facilities that have not yet submitted data are assumed to have either not yet begun monitoring for this permit cycle or have not discharged effluent for more than 15 consecutive days, in which case they are not required to conduct regular monitoring tests. So next we'll look at results of toxicity tests that use the TST approach for these facilities. And this is since May 2023, which is the US EPA effective date for Clean Water Act purposes. Next slide, please. So this table shows the test methods that are being used in the 19 POTW facilities with available SWRCB data, and how many of the facilities or the number of facilities which are using each test method. These test methods are the most sensitive species for the permittee, that is the test method selected from Table 1 of the toxicity provisions to determine the toxic effects of the effluent. So at the top line there, in chronic methods, for freshwater, Cereodaphnia dubia, survival and reproduction is the most frequently identified test for species sensitivity chronic test methods. For estuarine and marine waters in the second table, the fourth line down, it is mysid survival and growth. Although note that this test may use organisms instead of mysids that are within the test. Next slide, please. And here are a lot of data showing the results of toxicity tests that use the TST. So what we're looking at here are the total number of tests and total numbers of passes or fails for each test method. Each row is the sum of all tests across facilities that were reported from May 1st, 2023 until September 1st, 2024. So for example, in the first row, again, Cereodaphnia survival and reproduction, the 5 facilities that used that chronic test conducted 73 tests and used the TST to evaluate results. 60 of those tests passed and 13 failed. This is about 80 and 20% of tests respectively. When looking at the subtotal numbers, 84% of all types of chronic test methods using the TST had a pass result, and 88% of all acute test methods had a pass result. The large majority of samples do not show aquatic toxicity. Because these numbers are aggregated by test, it's important to describe what these data are not showing. Firstly, these are passes and fails of the toxicity tests themselves, not exceedances of effluent limitations or permit violations. An exceedance of the monthly median effluent limitation requires more than one fail within a calendar month. So therefore, only in cases where you have consecutive fails within that time period will you have a violation. So this means that this does not imply average pass and fail rates across all facilities, or these percentages don't imply average pass and fail rates. For example, all fails of the chronic Cereodaphnia tests were at a single facility. At that facility, there are 4 different sampling locations, and no individual sampling location failed the test at least twice consecutively at any monitoring location, which means that the monthly median effluent limitation was never exceeded. Next slide, please. Apparent violations. So I will discuss here results that may constitute violations under the toxicity provisions. There have been 4 instances of possible exceedances of effluent limitations during the May through 23 through September 24 period. And these were at only 2 of the 19 facilities we've been looking at. One facility used a chronic mysid toxicity test, and the other used the freshwater chronic green algae test. To date, there have been no formal enforcement actions by regional water boards from finding of a violation of aquatic by the regional boards from a finding of a violation of aquatic toxicity effluent limitations. So for discretionary enforcement actions, the water boards can make case-by-case considerations, including actions that permittees may take to correct toxicity exceedances, to determine where there should be a penalty and how substantial that penalty may be. Next slide, please. So what does this look like when there is an apparent violation, or there may be an apparent violation? So this chart shows the results of monitoring toxicity tests for a facility from the period of June 2023 through July 2024. So this facility used the mysid test, which measures 2 endpoints: survival and growth of organisms that are exposed to a sample of effluent versus organisms exposed to unaltered control water. So the start dates of the tests, or the initiation dates of the tests, because the tests often run for multiple days, are on the horizontal axis. The vertical axis shows the percent effect of each test, which is a measurement of the magnitude of the difference of what happens in the sample of effluent versus the sample of control water. The lower the percent effect is, the better the organisms exposed to effluent did versus organisms exposed to the laboratory control water. Note that it's possible for organisms to do better in the sample water than the control water on some occasions, and that's why some of these data points are less than 0 in some cases. So looking at the graph, the light blue line, which is the light blue dashed line, is for mysid growth, and the dark blue line is for mysid, the dark blue line, the dark solid blue line is for mysid growth, and then the light blue dashed line is for mysid survival. Every circle data point is a TST pass, and the 2 red X's up there at the top are TST fails. So this facility had a fail of the growth component of the mysid test in September, and then a subsequent fail 3 weeks later. For the 2 failed tests, percent effect values were greater than 25%, which is shown as that red dashed line going across the top. The 2 fails resulted in an exceedance of the MMEL in this case. However, this did not lead to a violation of the MDEL, an exceedance of the MDEL, which would only happen if the percent effect were over 50%, literally off the chart. So this example illustrates why aquatic toxicity monitoring is so important. The first fail in September corresponded with actual changes in the construction and processes in the facility with the construction of a new gravity tunnel. The 2 fails alerted the facility and the permitting authority that the process changes were not fully effective, that they may have been inducing toxicity. By the end of October, though, the facility operator had addressed the issue in communication with the permitting authority, and the process changes were effective in bringing the facility back into full compliance, way above that red line and way below that red line, and also way below that 10% line as well. So, even though there was a violation, the discharger worked diligently to identify and correct the cause of the problem. Therefore, there was no enforcement order for the violation and no penalties were levied. Since October 23, there have been no TST fails at this facility, and the percent effect values for both survival and growth are almost always near or even below, in some cases, 0. All right, next slide, please.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I just want to ask a question on that slide, just because it's
a lot.
Well, it's a lot, and I appreciate the report out here. And I've been wondering for the last couple of years how things have been going. So it's great to hear that we have some data now to show some of the results of the initial facilities that are permitted. My question is a little bit more wonky, though. I'm just the negative percentage. The organisms doing better in the sample water than the control water. Not to go too far down this rabbit hole, but is that surprising to you all? Like, is it something that you've normally see or is typical in these types of testings when we're using aquatic life? It just stood out to me here when I saw this chart. So if you could just talk a little bit more about that, I'd appreciate it.
I'd like to respond to that if that's all right. Yes, it's quite typical. In fact, there are, you might imagine, more nutrients and all kinds of good stuff for growth inducing in aquatic life in an effluent sample versus a laboratory control. So you'll get greater growth of algae, of the mysid shrimp, and other organisms in a sample like an effluent or an ambient water sample. And so yes, this is quite typical in a number of the tests.
Thank you for indulging me on that. It's a helpful clarification.
All right, so now we will discuss surveys that staff sent to laboratories and dischargers about their experiences with the new requirements. Next slide. So staff sent surveys to 14 laboratories and 21 dischargers. Staff sent surveys out to many accredited or ELAP accredited laboratories and many publicly owned treatment works and dischargers, and 14 laboratories and 21 dischargers responded to the surveys. The topics included were challenges associated with conducting toxicity tests in general, challenges initiating 3 toxicity tests in a calendar month, prices and volume of tests, familiarity with the toxicity provisions and recommendations, and training related to chronic Cereodaphnia dubia tests. The topic of most interest was the experiences initiating 3 toxicity tests in a calendar month when required. Next slide, please. So challenges with toxicity testing, specific to the laboratories. 10 of the 14 laboratories reported challenges, including culture crashes and broodboard health issues for Cereodaphnia dubia, difficulty procuring certain test organisms, food, the proper control water or other laboratory supplies, and staff availability. And here, staff availability means challenges in scheduling and compensating staff. Many of the chronic toxicity tests take days, so staff have to be available to start, monitor, finish tests over holidays and weekends. Next slide, please. So challenges with sample collection and logistics, and this is specific to dischargers. So 5 of 21 dischargers reported challenges with sample collection and shipping, including collecting and shipping samples on weekends and holidays, or during tight turnaround times. Testing and shipping costs remain a challenge, and again, staff availability, especially for smaller and remote facilities, which have more miles to travel and have to essentially make more effort to get people out to collect the samples in the first place. The next slide, please. All right, challenges with conducting or initiating 3 toxicity tests in a calendar month. Again, a lot of numbers here. So for laboratories, 10 of 14 labs reported that they have had to initiate 3 tests within a calendar month up to the time of the survey. 4 were able to initiate 3 tests almost all of the time. 1 was able to initiate 3 tests between 50 and 90%, 89% of the time. And 5 were unable to initiate 3 tests within a calendar month more than half the time. For dischargers, 8 of 21 dischargers have thus far had to initiate 3 tests. 4 of these were able to initiate 3 tests almost all the time. 2 were able to initiate 3 tests between, again, 50 and 89% of the time. And then 2 were unable to initiate 3 tests more than half the time. 4 laboratories did not respond to this question. We note that, or that's why 10 of 14 labs have had to initiate 3 tests in the calendar month. We note that all the labs reporting challenges are municipal labs. Of those that were able to initiate 3 tests within a calendar month, 90% of the time or more, 1 is a municipal lab and 3 are commercial labs. So there's some difference between municipal labs and contract labs. Next slide, please. So we'll now discuss how dischargers and laboratories have been addressing these challenges. Next slide. So, addressing challenges with the Cereodaphnia dubia chronic toxicity tests. Here are actions that a laboratory stated it was taking to address challenges with Cereodaphnia. In general, they are being proactive in logistical planning efforts and organism procurement. They provide preliminary test results within 48 hours of test termination to allow sufficient time for additional testing. They implement a strong quality assurance system. For the culture crash problem, to address that, they frequently renew cultures, maintain good hygiene practices to avoid contamination of those cultures, use a microscope instead of naked eye to make observations, and test different food vendors because different food vendors, my apologies, they test food from different vendors to be sure that different supplies are available simultaneously. Broodboard health issues. The laboratory frequently supplements the culture with new organisms from vendors and increases the number of brood boards prior to a test. So essentially more preparation. All right, next slide, please. So here, most of the recommendations described above that were being taken by that laboratory are also detailed in the Cereodaphnia dubia Quality Assurance Guidance Recommendations Study. This was completed by the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, SWRCB, in 2023. So of the surveyed labs, because other labs are also initiating or have also looked at this study and taken it into consideration. 11 labs responded, they are aware of the study. All the labs that are providing Cereodaphnia tests are currently implementing recommendations from the study, such as analyzing broodboard health prior to testing, documenting split broods daily, reviewing test solutions with a 2-hour window of test initiation time, improving documentation and training materials, and storing reagents properly. 5 labs were interested in additional training regarding this coming in the future, if available. And we also note here that we continue to seek EPA approval of an alternative test procedure. Next slide, please. So addressing other challenges. Control water. Laboratories and dischargers described other challenges such as with control water. One challenge, or rather preparing control water, obtaining sufficient control water for tests is a challenge. The approach to address this was to have different combinations of control water sources available to maintain hardness and alkalinity balance for each water used in the actual test. To address challenges with sample collection and delivery, staff here encourage coordination amongst dischargers to work with permit writers and explore approaches to coordinate collection. Some respondents stated that they are doing this to some extent. I believe the main example was coordinating, obtaining, or two different facilities coordinating, obtaining control water from the same source simultaneously. But the details are not available here. Next slide, please. So laboratory costs of toxicity tests. So most commercial laboratories reported that their prices for chronic freshwater toxicity tests are within these ranges. These are the middle ranges of laboratory costs. So we have our numbers right there: Cereodaphnia, fathead minnow, and green algae are the big three. We note here that that these ranges are from the 2020 economic analysis, but have been adjusted for California-specific inflation up until, I believe, July 2024. We note here, again, that the US EPA, or the State Water Board, has applied to US EPA for the alternative test procedure that would allow use of only one dilution of effluent for the Table 1 species tests, instead of the current 5. Upon approval, this will reduce the amount of materials needed in the tests, which we anticipate would lead to lower cost per test. Next slide, please. So now we'll discuss the use of the TST in monitoring programs. Next slide. So in stormwater, the state and regional water boards regulate stormwater discharges through a variety of different permits, most commonly or mainly the municipal separate stormwater system, MS4 permits. Under the provisions, permitting authorities must use the TST in their permits when the permit requires toxicity monitoring using a Table 1 test species or test method. Next slide, please. So an example of how requirements of the provisions have been put into stormwater permits comes from the San Francisco Bay Region's 2022 Municipal Regional Stormwater Permits. It also shows the complexity of toxicity requirements in these permits. So this permit covers multiple municipalities throughout the region, essentially urban watersheds, individual cities, or parts of the counties. It requires concurrent toxicity and pesticide monitoring of urban creeks, but requirements vary depending on the season, location of municipalities, and the specific pesticides that are being monitored for. The permit requires that the TST be used for water column tests for Table 1 species. And next slide, please. All right, so now we'll discuss ambient monitoring efforts. Here are some examples of ambient monitoring projects or programs that are currently or beginning to use the TST. In general, the Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, SWAMP, is the Water Board's umbrella water quality monitoring program. Within SWAMP, there are, for example, the Stream Pollution Trend Spot Program, Salton Sea Tributaries Monitoring Program, Central Coast Ambient Monitoring Program, CCAMP, and all these have used or have begun to use the TST in some situations. All right. Next slide, please. The integrated report. So starting with the 2024 integrated report, staff used the TST statistical approach for assessment and some aquatic toxicity test data. The integrated report provides biannual assessments of the quality of water bodies in California, and it relies primarily on data from SEDEN. SEDEN incorporates diverse data, much of it from SWAMP. There's a lot of data. Let's see. So for toxicity, in addition to using TST data, integrated report staff also use other statistical approaches, the ones that have been used in the past for a long time. Many toxicity tests used in assessments are sediment toxicity tests, and the TST statistical approach is not required for those test methods other than water column tests listed in Table 1. So this means that a lot of the toxicity testing going for the integrated report is not using the TST currently because. So in the future, we expect to assess toxicity data reporting the TST more and more in coming integrated report cycles. Next slide, please. Conclusions. Here are the conclusions for the presentation. Next slide, please. So overall, we're still in the early stages of implementation. After the effective date for Clean Water Act purposes in May 1st, 2023, the TST is beginning to be incorporated into existing stormwater, ambient toxicity monitoring, and water quality assessment programs. For MPDS permittees, only about 1/4 of POTWs have had to submit TST data for toxicity monitoring compliances as of September. So even if a permit has recently been renewed, say, the data may not have reached the final stage yet, or this stage yet. About 85% of the tests that we have that use the TST passed, and there have been only 4 violations between 2 of the 19 facilities. This is a low number, and these violations have not resulted in any enforcement actions. At least 1 facility, after receiving a violation, proactively eliminated toxicity in subsequent tests of the effluent. The biggest challenge, though, remains initiating 3 tests within a calendar month, but we are developing a body of knowledge and approaches and tools to address those challenges, and this is being shared by the laboratories, the dischargers, and the State Water Board staff. Next slide, please. And this concludes the presentation. We now invite the members to ask any questions they may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Really do appreciate this touchback on what was, I know, long discussed toxicity provisions and their implementation, and a lot of concern ultimately from the regulated community around its implementation. And so just really appreciate this touchback. The early data, hearing loud and clear, obviously, that we're still early on in the stages of beginning to incorporate the toxicity provisions within permits themselves. And so it's still limited, but it's helpful data nonetheless to be able to start to see what implementation is looking like, and actually just really impressed with the progress that is actually being made, and appreciate the dischargers and the laboratories and working with us to be able to refine a tool that I think is really important for us to have as a backstop ultimately within our water quality testing and understanding of impacts from dischargers. So just thank you. Really appreciate the good information. I don't have questions off the bat. We do have a few commenters, but looking to first see if any of the colleagues at the dais have any questions that they'd like to ask. Please, Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, I completely agree with your comments, Chair Esquivel. And my question is just as it relates to the fact that we are kind of in the infancy here of the provisions and really starting to get our arms wrapped around data. And I won't put you on the spot, but I know you reported on 55, I think it was 55 POTWs where we have data. I know we have a lot more POTWs than that in the state. So I think time will tell and be instructive as we learn more here, as more of them get these provisions implemented on their permit. But the area I wanted to ask about is one that you did bring up, which is on stormwater. And that's one where, it's one thing to have a large wastewater treatment facility and abilities to address different toxicity issues, perhaps through that process. It's another to have more of a distributed MS4 stormwater facility, infrastructure where you've got discharges all over the place. You've got various levels of treatment or maybe no treatment at all in different places. So just wondering, do we have any data yet on the stormwater toxicity side, and if not, do we have some, you mentioned the San Francisco Regional Board permit. Do we have some expectation for when we might start to see some of those results, and can it have maybe an update from you all on what we're seeing specifically as it relates to stormwater?
So most of our analysis and the data that we pulled really were POTWs because that was where we had the biggest data set. I will turn to my colleagues to see if did you pull any stormwater data? I'm going to suspect that we have not yet closely looked at it, Board Member McGuire, but we certainly can.
Can I add to that too, please? We intentionally carved out any wastewater treatment plants as part of the implementation of the provisions and just said, if you're requiring toxicity monitoring in your permits, your WDRs, that the TST needs to be used to analyze the data, assuming that you're using Table 1 methods. So the idea was to make sure that the data that we were collecting could be compared across program areas. So in terms of the intent of the monitoring requirements, that's really the regional board's purview and how they manage the requirements for where the samples are taken and frequency. All of that is under the discretion of the regional boards. That was not at all outlined in the provisions. So just wanted to make it clear that that's the only requirement is using TST if you're already requiring toxicity monitoring. But we can certainly gather data, and in fact, there's been toxicity monitoring in the stormwater program for many years. We have lots of data that we can draw from and certainly can report back on what we're finding in that program as well.
I'd appreciate that. And as you know, we have some statewide stormwater permits. So there's areas where there is overlap. And certainly as we think about stormwater discharges around the state, it's just it's an area that I've had interest in and continue to. So I'd appreciate any information that we have. And I do recall the carve out and also the desire for better consistency and good consistency across wherever the testing occurs. So thank you for that.
I'll just say that for the statewide MS4 permits, I believe the only one that may require toxicity monitoring is the Caltrans permit. I don't believe the industrial general permit or the construction general permit require toxicity monitoring. So just there's limited amount of data for the statewide permits.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. And also just the notion that these are iterative and adaptive programs that evolve over time. So I think to the extent we can learn and understand what we're seeing, even in places where there are permits that are implementing this kind of requirement, it'll be helpful.
Good questions, and thank you for that, board member. It'll be interesting to hear what data we do have on existing toxicity provisions within those stormwater permits. So thank you. Board colleagues, anything further? Board member Morgan, please.
Yeah. Thank you for the update. It's always good to hear how this is progressing. Definitely want to hear from our interested parties. On slide 19, you mentioned the challenges in the toxicity testing and that the laboratories reported a few different things. And so the culture crashes and the brood health issues for the Cereodaphnia, and also difficulty procuring certain test organisms. And so just want to hear more just about these difficulties. These are some things that I've been hearing about for quite a while now, and just want to see sort of progress being made on the crashes and the brood health, and then also curious about the control water. Control water has been something that, labs can have options on of what they use for the control water. And so I wanted to hear more about the difficulties in procuring, control water. That's something that is new, and want to hear more about what those difficulties are. Previously, you could use the water you're discharging to, you could use, distilled water. And so what are these difficulties that are now occurring?
Let me see if I can respond a little bit on the laboratory crashes, species availability. Would you be willing to talk about the control water after that? So I think with Cereodaphnia potential species crashes, there are definitely some, kind of laboratory control measures that can be put into place, and several laboratories really already are and doing a really great job with dealing with the species. This can be renewing the culture, increasing the number of brood boards, assessing the health prior to testing, renewing test solutions within a 2-hour window. There were a few of those that we shared on the slides, and there are a few recommendations that have come out of the SWRCB study that I think everybody's, starting to look at and really starting to implement. We're looking at annual reference toxicant tests as well. And so I really do think that we're moving forward. I would say, we broadly, basically the labs are moving forward with, figuring out how to have really strong Cereodaphnia tests. I also want to recognize that within the toxicity provisions, we did recognize that there can be instances, be it, a culture crash, or I'll also talk a little bit about, challenges getting a species, that when that happens, there's some recognition within the provisions about how we can deal with it so that it doesn't translate to a violation of the permittee. If the test was not initiated in time because there was a culture crash due to circumstances beyond the permittee's control, that does not result in a violation. And then in terms of species challenges, I think the one that we're really having a problem with is giant kelp, which is our marine species, and challenges try and just collect that. And there we're really trying to, we need to figure out, like, maybe it's a conversation with our colleagues in Fish and Wildlife about, getting more permits for collecting the species. We still need to kind of look into that. But in the meantime, we just want to, again, within the provisions, we can include sorry, I'm kind of bumbling this a little bit, but I want to be accurate in saying that we have language in the provisions that can be included into the permit that gives the executive officer then the ability on a more real-time basis to allow the use of what we're calling the next appropriate species if there's a supply issue, a reliability supply. So then they wouldn't need to use the kelp. They could use, fortunately, we don't have another marine plant, so it could be an invertebrate or another species. So there's some options in there so that it doesn't result in a permit violation.
Okay, thank you. I do recall some of these, and I think that went also to just the timing of getting all of the tests done within the month. So just wanting to keep up to date on how this is all progressing. Remember some of these coming up early on. Just want to keep up to date on how this is progressing through.
Absolutely. And then Zane, did you want to talk a bit about the control water?
Certainly. So for the control water, one of the big issues that we were made aware of is that one of the major suppliers of the control water stopped supplying that. And so a lot of the laboratories have been kind of scrambling to make sure they get the proper supply and part of it is trying to get the right balances. So the ion balance and other things in the control water, making it, a proper makeup so that the water itself doesn't impact the test. And so, they're intentionally, species need to be sensitive enough to toxicity, but we got to be careful when you create control water that you have, like, say, the ion balance and everything correct so that that doesn't impact them. And then, so with the larger laboratories, they have more resources. They're able to get water from different sources and mix it and be able to create really good control water. The smaller laboratories struggle a little bit more trying to create that resource and make sure they have the proper control water.
I guess I would want to just hear and learn more about that, because I know my gut just asked the question of if having trouble finding the correct control water, then is it not local, then how does that play out just as far as our water quality here and what we're testing for? And I would like to just get a better understanding of all of that and how that goes to show the toxicity here in California. And, where is this, what is this control water and where is it? And so just to get a better understanding, just make sure, of how the testing is. And so,
Thanks. And part of it is, the control water needs to be really consistent. You want your control, you don't want your control, to be all over the place. The consistency of the control is part of how we measure variability within the test. And so it is very important to make sure that that control water is really matched to the species and what the test is going on.
Understanding of, from being in the NPS program, just want to get more understanding of what's happening here. I know this is something that has been brought up, especially for these very sensitive species. And when we're looking at toxicity here in California, just want to get a better understanding.
Happy to do that. We'll follow up for you, Board Member Morgan.
Thank you, board member. Thank you for the responses. And it seems, there's a definite need probably for additional vendors around the control water. So if there's anyone listening, enterprising minds, definite need out there. Okay, thank you. And what we do have are some commenters. So let's go to them and see where further that takes our discussion here. First, I'd like to call up Cameron Irvine, be followed by Brant Jorgensen, then Jared Voskuhl, Peter Arth, and then our last commenter is Debbie Mackey. Good morning.
Chair Esquivel and board members. My name is Cameron Irvine. I'm an ecotoxicologist with Robertson Bryan. And I wanted to thank you for your interest and attention in this topic. I think I asked for 3 minutes. I probably won't need those. I also wanted to thank staff for their very informative presentation this morning. It's great to see that data. But as they described, there's still challenges that the labs are facing. And the provisions are still being implemented, the permits, as we've discussed. So I would just encourage the board to request additional information, maybe annual updates as these provisions are adopted into more permits, and we can keep track of how lab capacity is keeping up with the need for these tests, and how labs are overcoming the challenges that they faced. So even labs that have been implementing the measures that we've discussed about maintaining cultures, it is more effort to them and they still experience crashes. So that is something that labs have been working many, many years with. I've been working with the CTAC advisory group for labs to communicate and help each other try to figure out these problems that are inherent in these challenging tests. So they are working on it, and it would be good to see how they're overcoming them in the future. Yeah, and also the struggle to get 3 tests in the calendar month has been a concern of dischargers since the beginning of the discussion of the provisions, and we would certainly like to see how that challenge is addressed in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate those comments and engagement around this. I do appreciate that we're early on, and it is an important moment to check in because as we implement, this is the time to really be understanding and course correcting as we share information. So I appreciate the suggestion to have maybe a yearly or maybe bi-yearly, we can see what makes sense. But I think it is worth continuing to circle back and maybe next time actually having some labs that we invite up here to have some question and answer around. I think it's going to be helpful. So appreciate that, Mr. Irvine. Next, I'd like to call up Brant Jorgensen, be followed by Jared Voskuhl. Okay, Mr. Jorgensen, if you're viewing us through one of the web streams, you need to be on the platform. If you're having any challenges, please do just email the clerk of the board. And then we'll then go on to our next commenter, will be Jared Voskuhl, be followed by Peter Arth. Good to see you, Mr. Voskuhl.
Hi, good morning, Chair Esquivel and board members. Jared Voskuhl on behalf of CASA, the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. CASA represents over 135 agencies and municipalities that engage in wastewater collection, treatment, recycling, and resource recovery. Chair Escobar, it was great seeing you yesterday at the CEPA conference, and I really liked the comment you made to the group, which was such an inspirational talk, but about our systems in California having 19th century laws, 20th century infrastructure, and 21st century challenges. Felt like that was such a perfect encapsulation of so many issues we work on. With regards to these toxicity provisions, I have 3 comments for you. The first is the encouragement to continue and track annually on progress and report out on implementation. So I like that you'd already picked that one up, Chair. The second comment pertained to encouraging permit writers to switch the date for the calendar month off of the first of the month. And then the third comment pertains to supporting or conducting another intercalibration study. And so just to add a little bit of context for each of those remarks, 55 permits have been renewed, but we're very early on in this process. And it was intriguing hearing staff report about the responses on the surveys and some of the challenges that were relayed. I think that goes towards the need for this. So, we're very supportive of that and appreciative of staff sending out that survey to agents or to labs and to agencies to collect that information. And I think that should be something we're supportive of conducting annually. With regards to the second comment, right now, I think as I've heard anecdotally from our members, most of the permits are using the calendar month starting on the first of the month. And so you've already having reports about, can agencies do this in 30 days, 3 tests in 30 days? And so I think there's a concern as more and more permits are getting renewed, you might have a bottleneck if you're having everyone have to start the 30-day, time frame on the first. So maybe staggering it would be advantageous just to try to avoid that. And I think that would entail you all just, encouraging or guiding the permit writers to contemplate a different date. And then the third comment was just the need for, I think, another intercalibration study. The staff report referenced when the provisions were adopted that 8 labs could have a coefficient of variation of 0.15. Over the course of the SERIO study that was conducted after the provisions were adopted, only 1 lab could hit that threshold, and the threshold had to be lowered, or I guess increased to 0.20 for the coefficient of variation. And that only brought in 4 labs that can meet that. So even that's half of the labs that could do it. We flagged this concern, previously, but it all to say that I think we want to make sure labs are improving, that the recommendations in the expert report and the performance metrics are having that desired impact. And really, the only way to determine that is to conduct more sampling and evaluations. So the vehicle for that, remains to be seen. There's going to be a challenge with cost. We have some creative ideas for that, but ultimately, we only want to pursue this in partnership with you all. So we'll talk with staff and with the laboratory community that we're also in dialogue with about how to pursue something like this going forward, just to make sure that we really are getting these labs capacity increased and their competencies improved, so that we have more labs that exceed expectations that the experts provided us. So with that, just a big thanks to staff. They've been great to reach out, give us updates, provide us information, inform us about the survey, tell us about this update, and all of that communication has been very appreciated. So we look forward to more partnership and seeing you all in another year. So thank you.
Really appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Voskuhl. Good to see you again here, and just appreciate the good comments and engagement here. Again, we're all here at the early stages of implementation, and so your feedback and engagement and critical eye is welcomed. And so just thanks. Really appreciate the support and look forward to, I know, the further discussion we'll have around this. Good to see you. Next, I'd like to call up Peter Arth, and he'll be followed by our last commenter, Debbie Mackey.
All right, there we go. Good morning. My name is Peter Arth. I'm the Director for Environmental Toxicology with Enthalpy Analytical. We're one of the largest contract providers for toxicity testing here in California. You guys might remember me. I was the private stakeholder for the QA study for Cereodapnia. So first off, I want to thank board staff for the report and all the engagement through the process. We were one of the labs that responded to the survey and, had a follow-up discussion with both Katie and Zane on some of the responses that we provided. And so we appreciate the level of engagement that staff has had on this in formulating the report. I want to echo what others have said, that an annual or biannual update on the progress of the provisions would be helpful. I think this is a great forum for stakeholders who have a vested interest in the progression of the provisions to be able to voice thoughts and share feedback, and to have dialogue and discussion around it. So I think that having this is very helpful. The one item that I want to address today and use my time for is one that Rebecca brought up, and that is sort of the critical nature of the supply of giant kelp right now. This is something that we've been watching for a little while, and while it has always been a challenging species to collect because it has to be wild caught, there are limitations on logistics for transport and challenges with the viability of the species. Specifically, restrictions to collections in the San Diego region of giant kelp have become quite challenging. And so, whether it is an interface with Fish and Wildlife to better understand why those collection permits are not necessarily being allowed, or the collection amounts are not being allowed to be high enough, is one pathway. But I do want to very much echo and bring to the board's attention the fact that this marine plant, the giant kelp, does not have an alternate species in Table 1 right now. So either in the provisions or in the ocean plan, this is the only option for marine dischargers who have the species requirement in their permit, either for sensitive species screening or for their compliance monitoring. And so it would, for a long-term solution, if the giant kelp population continues to be an issue, adding an additional alternate is something that I would encourage board staff to look into. We recognize that there's challenges with finding an acceptable alternate that can be implemented in the time that it takes to get this into Table 1 or get this into the ocean plan. There are ASTM methods for marine diatoms that are currently being used in a number of individual programs here in the state of California that could be considered as alternates. We recognize the need for additional data collection to be able to formulate alpha and beta values for the TST to be used as the statistical tool for it. But all of this aside, I do believe it would be a good use of board staff's time to begin the process to get this alternate in. And I really want to emphasize Rebecca's comment around the current language in the provisions in Section 3C that does allow the second most sensitive species to be used in a time where the primary species is not available, even from a viability standpoint or from an ability to procure that organism. Some encouragement to regional board staff to allow dischargers to make this decision, because oftentimes there's not a lot of leeway. If you're a monthly monitoring discharger, you have to make these decisions quickly. There often isn't time for a formal back and forth written correspondence. And so permit writers making that available as an option in black and white in new permits that are being renewed would be incredibly helpful, as well as some guidance to board staff at the regional boards to allow these second species to be used in times where the primaries are not available. So with that, that was the primary thing that I wanted to get across. So not necessarily related to the implementation of the provisions and how it's going, but it is a critical challenge that is the toxicity testing community is facing right now. And so with that, I will thank you for your time, and I'm happy to follow up with board staff for any of the items that I mentioned today and provide further explanation. If you have any questions, happy to answer.
Really appreciate that. Please do follow up. I really appreciate your expertise and contributions here. And to the point you brought up, I think it is an important component of implementation that we keep an eye on. And so, just looking to Ms. Fitzgerald, it would be good to maybe have some discussion with Fish and Wildlife just to kind of understand, because, given that giant kelp is the only species listed in the table, it kind of leaves us with nowhere else to go. But also appreciate the recommendation of starting to think of what those other species may be. Yeah, what did come to mind was certainly on the freshwater side, there is the ability to use algae, and here then, some marine-based similar species. It'd be interesting to know if we can find a viable alternative.
I agree with that, and also just want to add that one of the things we would still like to do is, circle back with all of our permit writer colleagues at the regional boards and at the state board and take some of the information that we've been gathering from these surveys and as we've been putting this together and kind of what we've been seeing that's been really great in the permits, which is quite a lot, and then some encouragement for some of this language associated when you need to use a different species, and making sure that that is included so that the EO can move quickly if necessary. Few other little pieces where we have some suggestions for improvement, but so that's still coming. That's the next step for us, is to sit down with our permit writers and talk a little bit more about toxicity implementation as well. And so this will be something on the agenda.
Fantastic. Really appreciate that. And thank you again, Mr. Arth. Really appreciate your contributions here. Okay, next is our last commenter, who will be Debbie Mackey.
Oh, super. Good morning, Chair Esquivel and board members. My name is Debbie Mackey. I'm with the Central Valley Clean Water Association, and I want to start off by thanking you for your continuing interest in this subject, because it is one that is very important to us. The Central Valley Clean Water Association represents many of the wastewater treatment plants in the Central Valley. Within the Central Valley, there are approximately 7 NPDES wastewater treatment plants. And as you saw, actually, before I get to that part, I also want to really, again, thank staff for this presentation and pulling together this information and the early information that and presenting it. So going back to that, we've got about 70 different permits that are going to fall under this. And as the chart showed, there's, one of our big things is we have a general permit that has 20 enrollees. And out of those 20 enrollees, probably only 3 of them have gotten the notice to comply under that, with the new provisions by the August date. And since then, we've had 2 more. So it really just, I wanted, it looks like a big number. I want to just tell you we're still at the infancy, and certainly, again, out of the other 10 individual permits, about 7 of them are brand new. So we're really starting to see early information, and I think that staff did a good job in highlighting that some of them may not have implemented it, or it would have been their first implementation, and seeing the challenges. I still, I think that they're just going to get a little bit bigger. So I really am encouraged to hear the discussion about, further updates to the board, especially whether it is biannual or a little bit more, but somewhere in there, because we are getting a more significant population in there, and then with the early challenges. I also want to just take a minute and thank, I know that the Central Valley board staff works a lot with our NPDES permittees, and just want to thank them for that, because I do think that they are working to try to get that flexibility on the calendar month, and would just encourage other boards, because we are all going to need the flexibility in order to make this work. We'd also like to support the, further work on the intercalibration study. It didn't solve everything. It didn't, we were looking for that silver bullet. It didn't find it, but I, as Jared said, with that few number of laboratories that are hitting that reliability for laboratories, we really need more capacity, especially as this increases. So anyways, just wanted to give that update, or add to that information. But I really, again, would encourage your involvement, and just appreciate these staff presentations on the current status of what is to us a very important compliance issue. So thank you.
Thank you as well. Really appreciate your time this morning, Ms. Mackey, and contributions here to this. And yes, I think, again, it'll be really important to continue to circle back. I think we want to maintain momentum, highlight issues early here in implementation. And so just, again, timing wise, leave it up to you all as to when it makes sense, when there's enough information to really be coming back and be able to iterate off of the discussion. So no kind of like firm opinion if it has to be yearly or every 2 years, but appreciate that. Again, there's a real opportunity to continue to learn together. And again, thank you, Ms. Mackey.
Thank you.
If I may, I just want to say my appreciation to everybody who, I mean, we've been working with the commenters that you've heard today, and I know that there's a lot of interest and care going into these, implementing the toxicity provisions and all of the work at the labs and all of the work at the municipal and private labs and across the permittees as well. So we really appreciate it and we see it. And are obviously still very vested and interested in this implementation as well. So we're happy to come back with some frequency and do updates, follow up on the stormwater data. We'll follow up on the control water issue with both of you and continue to have discussions and continue to see how we can address any issues as they arise.
Really appreciate it. Really great work. Looking to fellow board colleagues, if there's anything further to comment, any questions? All right, hearing none then. Thank you so much. Really appreciate, again, this update. This has been very helpful for myself and I know the rest of the board members this morning as we keep our focus on implementation of these provisions. I know other states as well are watching, looking to see if, how we can make this work. So it's appreciated. Thank you. All right, that now brings us to our last item here on today's agenda, board member reports. And I just want to start the board member reports by welcoming back Board Member McGuire. It's really good to have you back here. Those board watchers out there, I noticed that Board Member McGuire wasn't here these last couple of meetings, but just really appreciative and thankful and good to see you here today.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
I have my quick report, which is here, 2 weeks ago now then. Let me get my dates so that I'm not just throwing things out. On the 7th and 8th, I was up near Yosemite at Evergreen Lodge at a conference localizing California's waters. It was a great opportunity just to connect with folks. Obviously, it was a big week, but a lot of energy, good energy around continuing to think differently about our water systems, to continue to invest in them. There was a lot of discussion at the conference there, certainly about Prop 4 and its passage, and the exciting opportunity that those investments have to make in water management across the state. So it was a good gathering. Really thank Regina Hirsch for pulling that together, and also Bob Wilkinson over from UC Santa Barbara, and Dennis O'Connor. They were there participating. So it was a nice group of folks, and appreciated the opportunity to attend. And then just yesterday, I was at the Council on Infrastructure Financing Agencies, or of Infrastructure Financing Agencies, yearly conference and workshop. And so that was held down in Long Beach this year. Joe Karkowski is actually on the board of CFA, and Mike Downing is one of the co-chairs for the workshop events. So really I appreciate the participation of our folks in that state convening. So this is all the state administrators of the state revolving funds. And so it was really focused on that. It was a good opportunity to connect with folks at US EPA as well. And it was just exciting. We're in the middle, as we all well know, of investing the federal bipartisan infrastructure law dollars into communities. And so folks are really focused on that and the exciting generational opportunity that is to renew our commitment to access to sanitation and drinking water. So it was nice to be able to attend yesterday, and good to see folks like Jared there as well. Those are my only updates. Morgan.
Hi, I just have one. Last Friday, November 15th, I was able to go up to Siskiyou County and tour the Scott and Shasta watersheds. I missed out last year. I am solo on the item, and so I joined the Siskiyou County Farm Bureau and a couple of the supervisors and toured both watersheds. So I guess I went up on Thursday the 14th, and I was there on the 15th also. So it was a good tour.
Beautiful area of the state, and glad you were able to make it up there. I know it's it's a little bit of a drive, but it's a beautiful drive. So
it's a beautiful drive, and it was great to see some snow-capped mountains and some changing color trees, and just really beautiful this time of year.
I have two reports, both dealing with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So yesterday, I was on a panel over at the Resources Agency celebrating the 10-year anniversary. And I do have some swag to give you guys. Just a little sticker celebrating it. It's in here somewhere in my pocket. And it was great to be on a panel. Take one, pass it down. Great to be on a panel with individuals from the agricultural community, Paul Goslin, and then also Department of Conservation. And this was the third and final panel focusing on the future. The previous panel was related to implementation, and so there were a number of representatives from groundwater sustainability agencies. And the first panel that was kicked off by former Governor Brown was those that had been involved in the development of the Historic Act. And so it was a great day. I would say overall, just a very positive tone, concerned about challenges, but people are, really focused on implementation phase, which I know that's what we're all talking about as well. Quite a lot of interest in recharge in the panel that I was on, questions coming up about recharge. And so there's a good discussion there about the distinction between recharge of the basin versus capture, obtaining a permit, and seeking credit. And then last week, I went down to Visalia to be part of a celebration that was organized by Self-Help and the Greater Kauai Groundwater Sustainability Agency. This is a celebration for the first ever transfer of financial assistance for a domestic well from the state of California and our Division of Financial Assistance and under the SAFER program and emergency funds and over to responsibility of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, Greater Kauai. So it was great to be there and just really want to thank our staff for all of the really good work that they did for this well and the many others, but really looking forward to having more celebrations like this, moving over to local responsibility, control, financial participation.
That's fantastic and really exciting, the work here to more fully implement the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and to have developments like that where, here the state, as you well know, was here supporting the program, helping to support dry wells, and being able to have that local leadership to hand off is exciting. So thank you for being there and for doing that. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Yeah, I just following up on that. Thanks, echo the thanks for representing us at both of those events. And, I'm really hopeful about the Kauai's model and program really leading the way on, I think, hopefully what will be a trend of groundwater sustainability agencies really taking on these issues. They have so much expertise and are really well placed as part of their groundwater management to do this. And I think, their Kauai is just really doing a stellar job, and it's great to celebrate that. And I really hope that we can continue to uplift those sorts of programs and see that in a lot more areas. I also did a GSA tour because I hadn't gone to Delta Mendota area yet. And so it was great. I actually really didn't have as much background, especially on a lot of the wildlife refuge water there. And so fabulous time. Really appreciate all the folks that helped put that together. And staff were able to go with me, which was great. And then otherwise, I've been doing a lot of talks around SAFER and consolidations, various ways. And I don't need to go through all of them, but I do have one tonight. And if folks out there that are really listening to this want to go at 5 at CNRA. But anyway, I do think. We have Prop 4, we have some, hopefully some opportunity with that. And also we have less money than we used to in terms of infrastructure funding. You know, our really good days right after COVID of huge amounts of infrastructure money are not as good. So I think it's really great timing that these mitigation programs are coming on, whether it's CV salts or GSAs or Region 3, so that we can really make the best use of everyone's resources and investments and try to accelerate solutions and prevent more impacts. Thanks.
You're here. Thank you, Board Member. Board Member McGuire.
Yes. I have no report because I've been out, but I just want to say, I think this was the first time in the last 6 years being on the board that I missed a board meeting, maybe even at all, let alone 2 meetings concurrently. And I just want to share how thankful I am for the board and the continuity and the ability to continue all the important work, no matter what. You know, just I'm one member, there's 5 of us. You know, we all do good work here, and it's also important to the state. So I'm just watching from afar and keeping tabs on things as I've been able to. It kind of gave me a little bit of a different lens and perspective than I've had here sitting at the dais, you know, every other week. And so just really appreciative for you all as colleagues, and thank you. And it's really good to be back.
Thank you. We're fortunate to have you as a colleague amongst it, and you were definitely, your presence was missed at the dais here and definitely noticed. And so just thank you back. I really appreciate it. All right. Now that brings us here to the end of the board meeting. We will have closed session. The only item we'll have closed session on is Marble Mountain Ranch. We'll meet in room 230 and probably give ourselves 15 minutes to transition over. So at 11:15, we'll meet in 230. And then otherwise, our next board meeting will be December 4th. And until then, we'll see you all. Thank you very much for your work. We won't be adjourned until after closed session, and Mr. Lawfer will come close us out. So thanks again for everyone for today's discussions. Look forward to seeing you on the 4th. Be safe, be well, have an amazing Thanksgiving, please. Enjoy time with friends, family, and just remember all the things that bring us joy in this world. Thanks, everyone.